Um, so he didn't get that as far as the end of the daf, but it's okay because Monday's daf Yudalit is very, very brief. So we're going to make use of that to maybe get a little bit behind, but these are long, long dapim. So I'm going to start from where he got up to on Friday, which is 12 lines from the wide lines on Yud Aleph Amud Bet, which is around, I don't say 2/3, 1/3 of the way down the long lines, but it'll be pretty quick to catch up. So we're talking, Miriam, this might be a review for you. So the Mishnah,
Yeah,
so this
yeah,
got into a lot of really interesting stuff, but long, that we're talking about the Nasi, right? We keep talking about a Sa'ir of a Nasi. The Mishnah finally taught us that a Nasi is really a king. Nasi means, I don't know, president, but it really means the Melech. And we talked about how you make a Melech. So a Melech is usually anointed, right? And we discussed yesterday about where the Shabbat Mishcha was, how they didn't run out of it, and the other person is anointed, of course, is the king. So, I'm sorry, the Kohen Gadol, right? The king and the Kohen Gadol, the Melech and the Kohen Gadol. We said in the Braita yesterday that a king, the son of a king, is not anointed unless there's some disagreement about who's taking over, right? But that Kohen Gadol, the son of a Kohen Gadol, has to be anointed, and that's what we're up to right now. Amar Mar. So again, it's the 12th of the wide lines, the sixth last word on the line. Says the Braita before, Afilu Kohen Gadol ben Kohen Gadol told Mashiach that even a Kohen Gadol is the son of a Kohen Gadol, so he's taking over for his father, which could happen. He needs to get anointed with Shemin HaMishcha, Minalan. How do we know that? Because it says, a Kohen HaMashiach tachtav mi banav. A Kohen who gets anointed instead, in place for his son, basically. Name a Krava Kohen mi tachtav mi banav. My HaMashiach. Why does it stress in this pasuk the Kohen Mashiach? Kamash Malan, the Mibanav, the Kohen Gadol, Yavi Mashiach, Havi Kohen Gadol, Ilo Havi Kohen Gadol. That even if you're the son of the Kohen Gadol and they want to appoint you the Kohen Gadol, if they anoint you, you get that appointment. If they don't anoint you, you don't get that appointment. So that is the limud for Kohen Gadol. We are, Robert, if you want to know, we're on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Bet, 14 lines from the wide lines. Amar Mar, the next principle in the Braita was Ein Moshchin Melech ben Melech. We don't anoint a king who's the son of a king. Right now, if you recall, in Malchei Yehuda, except for one exception, right, with Atalia the queen, all the kings were sons of former kings. Right, there was no loss of that chain. In the other kings, Malchei Yisrael, there was constant loss. Right, there were different families that took over, and they were not related. So says the Braita, we don't anoint a king who's the son of a king. Minal, and how do we know that? Amar Vachabar Yaakov Dichtiv, because the pasuk says, and this is pasuk we recently had, the man yarich yamim al mamlachto. Right, you follow the rules of Hashem, you will have many days al mamlachto. What that means is that it's a Yerusha hilachem. It's a Yerusha. You don't need a new anointing to appoint a new king. It is his hereditary. Again, these are Malchei Yehuda, Malchei Beit David. Yeah. The Braita said that if there's a debate like with Shlomo, right, it wasn't clear who was going to be the king after David. So then you need to anoint the person. How do you know that? The lav kol debay malka moria malchuta lebenah. That you can't just say I'm giving it over to my son. Meaning, if there's a debate about this issue, then you have to actually anoint the new king, even if he's the son of the old king. How do you know that? Right? So that is based on the continuation of the pasuk. Sorry, I lost the place. Where am I? Amar Rav Papa, Amar Krux. The pasuk says, "Hu ubanav b'kerev Yisrael." That's the continuation of the pasuk we just quoted. Him and his sons among all the people. Meaning, bisman sheshalom b'Yisrael, when everyone is together and there's no fights. Karina Bey hu ubanav ba'afila below Mashiach. But if there is a dispute, like in the times of the Braita talked about two times, the time of Shlomo and the time of Atalia, right, when she took over and there was no king, etc. In those times, you actually have to do Mashiach and make the next king. Now, Tana, the Braita continued. We're now 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines from the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud. Af Yehu ben Nimshi lo nimshach ela mipnei machlukuto shel Yoram. Right? Yehu ben Nimshi was only anointed because they were trying to get rid of Yoram. Now, if you recall, this is a complicated story in the Tanakh, but Yoram was the son of Achav, right? It was the king of Yisrael, right? The son of Achav was Basha, right? Achav ben Basha. So Achav ben was someone. anyways, well, Omri, right? Omri was his father, I think. So, anyways, Navas got me. So, but his son Yehu was basically, I'm sorry, Yoram, his son was deposed, and the new king was Yehu. Now, Yehu was from a different family, so it would make sense that you would anoint Yehu because he was the first of his chain, right? Now, of course, it makes no sense to anoint Yehu because he's not from Malchei Beit David, which we're going to ask in a second. But we'll get to that question. Says the Gemara, why are you saying you anointed Yehu because there was a machloket with the son of Achav? Typically, Mishum Derishonu. He's the first in his shalshalat. He's the first in his chain because he was a new family. Says Gemara, you're right. Clearly, there are missing words in this Braita. Chasurim and chasra are missing ideas. Hachi Ketani. This is how the Braita meant to continue yesterday. Malchei Beit David Moshuchin, you only anoint Malchei Beit David, but Malchei Yisrael ain't Moshuchin, right? The Malchei Yisrael had nothing to do with the Beit HaMikdash, if you recall, that was their principal thing. They had nothing to do with the Avodah, and they did not get Mashiach, right? How do you know that, Minalan? Amar Rava, because Amar Kra, Kum Mashcheo Kizeu Melech, right? When Shmuel is told by Hashem, go and be Moshech, this one, meaning David, he is the king. Zeh to'un Mashiach. Go anoint him, meaning David, vein acher to'un Mashiach. But other kings of Malchei Yisrael don't need Mashiach. Now, probably only from the time of David and on, because remember, Shaul did have Mashiach. But anyways, that is what the Braita means to say. And so, Amar Mar, so now getting back to our Braita, why was Yehu ben Nimshi got anointed if usually Malchei Yisrael don't get anointed, right? So the reason is because although normally they don't, because he was starting a new chain and he wanted to make it very notable that he's going to be a king, he was anointed. So it says the Braita, Af Yehu ben Nimshi lo nimshach el mepnei machlukoto shel Yoram. Says Gemara, that does not seem like a real good reason to take the Shemin HaMishcha from Yerushalayim and bring it to Yisrael, to wherever they were, in order to anoint him. Mishum machlukuto shel Yoram ben Achav nim'al b'shemen, right? These are people who obviously we don't think highly of in the Torah, at least in the Navi, right? Why are we taking the Shemin HaMishcha for these people? Says Gemara, you're right. It wasn't the real Shemin HaMishcha. If you recall, and this we're going to have, we don't recall because we're going to have it later today, actually, there was like a backup Shemin HaMishcha, meaning there was the real Shemin HaMishcha that Moshe Rabbeinu made that lasted for all generations. But they very often ceremoniously used other oil. And the other oil was used to symbolize, but it wasn't the real Shemin HaMishcha. So Kedamar Rav Papa, as Rav Papa is going to say in a little bit about a different context, Ba'afarsima Dachya. They had this afarsima dachia, which mine translates as balsam oil, which I guess is some, very nice oil. And hachinami afarsima dachia, that's what it meant. They anointed him not with the real Shemin HaMishcha, but with some other oil that is meant to sort of, simulate the Shemin HaMishcha. And then the final one we said in the Braita, the other king of Yehuda that was anointed with Shemin HaMishcha, even though he was the son of a king, was Yehoachaz. Yehoachaz, remember of Yehoachaz, we're going to go into this in a little bit in a second, but Yoshio was one of the last kings. When Yoshio died, really the Melucha died. Remember, they had no more independence. The kings of Mitzrayim and the king of Bavel took over, and they basically appointed the children in different orders as essentially, I don't know, a vassal king kind of, right? So they worked for Bavel, basically, or Mitzrayim. So those sons, Yehoachaz was one, and Yehoiakim was another. So they appointed Yehoachaz with Shemin HaMishcha because Yehoiakim hayagadol mimenu shtei shanim. People wanted to make Yehoiakim the king because he was older, and whatever reason they chose to make Yehoachaz the king, it was really not choice by the Jews, right? But they anointed him to show that even though he's younger, he becomes the king. Is that true? Mika Shishmine, was Yehoiakim really older than Yehoachaz? Achtiv, the pasuk says, is a pasuk in Divrei Yamim, which is a very difficult pasuk in the beginning of Divrei Yamim, when it's going through the lists of all the people. It says, B'nei Yoshiyahu, the children of Yoshio, the king, HaBechor Yochanan, Hasheni Yehoiakim, Hashlishi Tzidkiah, Ravi Shalom. Okay, now if you notice this list, Yehoiakim is on the list, but Yehoachaz is not on this list, right? And says Rabbi Yochanan, really these are all the same people. Well, not all, but almost all. There's two people here. Who's Shalom, who Tzidkiah? One son is named Shalom and Tzidkiah, so that the son number 3 and 4 are the same. And who Yochanan, who Yoachaz? And Yochanan is also Yehoachaz, right? So actually there's 3, right? There's Yehoiakim, there's Tzidkiah, whose name is also Shalom, and there's Yochanan, whose name is Yehoachaz. And what you see from here is that Yochanan was the first in the order. So what do you mean Yoachaz is not the oldest? Says Gemara, no. It means Olam Yehoyakim Kashish. The truth is Yehoyakim is the older one. Why is Yochanan, the first son, called the Bechor, my Bechor, when we said that's Yoachaz? It's because Bechor the Malchut. He's not the real Bechor. He was the first one of the brothers who became the king. And since he was the first one of the brothers who became the king, he was called the Bechor. But he's not the oldest. And that's why they had to anoint him. That's the Gemara, but then why'd they make him the king? Right? Where are we? Mi Malchi Zutri Mikami Kashishi, we're 6 lines from the bottom. Do you give the kingdom to a younger son before an older son? V'hachtiv, but the pasuk explicitly says that Hamamlacha Natan Lihoram Ki Hu HaBechor. This is much later in Divrei Yamim, at the end of Divrei Yamim Bet, not the end, but towards the end, when it says that they made the Mamlacha to Yoram because he was the oldest, right? Implying that he was the oldest. Says Gemara, he was not the oldest. But he was the one who was appropriate. He was appropriate to be king. Yehoram mimale mekom avotav havi. Yehoram was roi to be king, and so he was made the king. Yehoyakim, who was older than him, lav mimale mekom avotav havi. He was not able to fill in for whatever reason. He wasn't suited to be king, and so they made his brother the king before him, even though he was younger. Now, Amar Mar, let's go back and quote this Braita. We're now 6 lines still from the bottom. Hu shalom, hu tzidkiyo. Right? We said that shalom in the pasuk is Tzidkiyo, and Yochanan, who's the first person in the pasuk, is Yehoachaz. Says, how could you say Shalom and Tzidkiyo are the same person? It says there were 4 sons. You're saying son number 3 and son number 4 are the same. It counts 1, 2, 3, 4. Dichtiv hashlishi harivi, number 3 and number 4. Says, well, no. My shlishi, they call him shlishi because really he's the 3rd son, shlishi the banim. But why is he called the 4th one? Because Revi'i the Malchut, he was the 4th one in the family to become the Melech. The Me'ikara Malach Yehoachaz, as we just said, Yehoachaz, even though he wasn't the oldest, became king first. Then they deposed Yehoachaz, Ubesof Yehoyakim, and then it was Yechanya, and then Tzidkiyo, who remember was the last king before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita, let me explain a little bit more to you about this history. Hu Shalom, hu Tzidkiyo. We said that the pasuk who names 2 people, Shalom and Tzidkiyo, it's the same person. So why was he called 2 names? Lama nikra shemo Shalom. Why was he called Shalom? Because Shahayu Mishulam b'maasav. He was great. He was a very perfect person. He was Shalem. He was the last king. He was Shalem. Now some say he was called Shalom actually for the opposite reason, because Shalmu Malchut Beit David b'yamav. He was the end, right? Shalom means they finished. The Malchut Beit David sadly was done with him. He was the last of the kings of Malchut Beit David before the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and they never came back really. They did come back eventually, but they didn't come back with a straight shalshelet, a straight chain. Umashmo. Now, what's his real name? Again, he already has a few names. Tzidkiyo Shalom, but he's got another name. His other name is Matanya Shmo. Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, this is in Melachim now, Vayamlech Melech Bavel. Melech Bavel made the king at Matanya. Dodo Tachtav Yasev et Shmo Tzidkiyo. That Melech Bavel made Matanya king, and he named him Tzidkiyo, right? So really, Tzidkiyo was not his name; it was the name actually given to him by the Melech Bavel, by Nebuchadnezzar. Amar Leis. Now, why did Melech Bavel call him Tzidkiyo? Because Tzidkiyo means Tzadik Hashem, right? Tzadik Yah. So he said, Yah Yitzdak Alecha Tadin Intermodi. God, your God, should judge you if you rebel against me. I'm making you the king on condition that you serve me in Bavel, and if you don't, your God should judge you. Shenemar, as it says, and some take out these words, right? They brought him to Bavel. V'gam b'melech Nebuchadnezzar marad. That Tzidkiyo rebelled against Melech Nebuchadnezzar, Asher Hishpio Belohim. He had sworn by God that he was going to listen to him. And Hashem, therefore, no Hashem, but Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. And so, therefore, that is why he had all these names. Now, says the Gemara at the top of Daf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, stop me if it's too fast. That's a lot of information here. Ask the Gemara, you just said that the sons of Yoshio and the family of Yoshio were all anointed, not all anointed, but Yoachaz was anointed because he was younger. Ask the Gemara, but mi havi Shemen HaMishcha? Did they still have Shemen HaMishcha in the days of Yoachaz? If you recall, Vatanya says the Braita, we've had this Braita before, it's a very important Braita and one that's known to many people. Says the Braita, Mishenignaz Aron. When they hid the Aron, we're going to see in a second when they hid the Aron, but during the time of Yoshio, who was the father, remember, of Yoachaz, they hid the Aron, right? And then they never brought it out. There was no Aron in the second Beit HaMikdash. But says the Braita, at the same time that they hid the Aron, Nignaz Shemen HaMishcha, they also hid the original Shemen HaMishcha that came from Moshe Rabbeinu, and they hid Sinsenet HaMan, the container of the man that Moshe, remember, had, the Torah says, put together a sample of the man as a symbol for all time. They had that in the Beit HaMikdash, and that was hid as well. And Maklosh Aaron, Shkida Ufracha, remember the staff of Aaron that flowered to show that Aaron was truly the right one. And Argaz Shalchu Plishtim Doron Yisrael. There was next to the Aron for all the time in the Beit HaMikdash. There was a separate box. Remember that when the Aron was captured in times of Shaul by the Plishtim, and then it was returned when Shaul died in David's time. It says they sent back a box with it, so that box was kept with it. Shenemar, because it says at Klei Hazahav Asher Shivotim Lo Asham Tasimu Ba'argaz Mitzido V'Shdachtem Oto V'Halach. That the silver kalim that they had stolen, this is referring to the Plishtim, they put back in this argaz. Argaz means like a chest, like a container next to the Aron, and they sent it back. So now Miganso, continues the Braita, who hid the Aron and the man and all these things? Yoshio Melch Yehuda Ganso. Yoshio hid it. Why? Shirasha Katuv b'Torah, as Yoshio saw that it was written in the Torah. Where are we up to? We are 8 lines from the top. This is obviously a very important pasuk from today. He saw that it says in the Torah that Yolech Hashem Otcha, God will send you, Vet Malkicha, I'm going to read the pasuk from the Dvarim Chavchet, Asher Takum Alecha El Goya Shelo Yadata Tav Avotecha. God will exile you. And so Yoshio heard the nevuah that from Yirmiyahu that he was going to be exiled. He saw that the Torah says that if you're exiled, you're going to be sent all out. And he said, look, if we're going to Galut, I don't want them to take the Aron. So Tzivavi Ganzum. So he gave a command, and they hid the Aron before the exile. Shenemar, as it says, this is now a quote from the end of Divrei Yamim. Vayomer laleviim hamivinim lechol Yisrael kadoshim laHashem. Yoshio said to the Leviim, who were teachers of Yisrael, Tenu et Aron HaKodesh b'bayit Shabbat Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael. Put the Aron in the Bait. Don't even put the Aron in the Bait. The Aron already is in the Bait. It implies that there was a secret chamber somewhere, and you got to see the Raiders of the Lost Ark maybe to find it, but there was a secret area somewhere that Shlomo had prepared for the future time when we would have to hide the Aron. And so put it in the Bait, the Shabbanat Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael, Ein lachem maseh b'katef. You no longer are going to carry the Aron, meaning when we go out to exile, you're not walking with the Aron. So these things were all hidden. And Amar Rabbi Elazar, that tells you about the Aron. But says Rabbi Elazar, Atya Sham Sham. We learn from the pasuk Sham by Aron and Sham by the man, that the man was hidden also. And Atya, actually I think has the opposite gear. So Rashi is Dorot first. But either way, we learned out Mishmeret. It says Mishmeret by the man. It says Mishmeret by Aaron's staff. Atya Dorot. It says Dorot by the man. It says Dorot by the Shemen HaMishcha. And so basically all these things were hidden. So our question is, how could you say that the son of Yoshio, Yehoachaz, was anointed with Shemen HaMishcha? There was no more Shemen HaMishcha. And this is where Rav Papa said, it's true. There was no more Shemen HaMishcha, but they had a replacement, meaning Ba'afar Sema Dachya. This is referring to the balsam oil that they used. Basically, once they no longer had Shemen HaMishcha, they had a pseudo Shemen HaMishcha. The same way we do with many things, right? We don't have the original, but we do it as a zecher, basically, for that. So that is the explanation of this sort of Shemen HaMishcha, which isn't real Shemen HaMishcha.
Didn't we say before, though, that the oil actually lasted forever and ever? That it was like a whole question about there were nisim that took place with it?
So, right. So we did say that was yesterday's daf. We talked about it being obviously one container of oil can't last forever unless it's a miracle. So it did. The point yesterday was that it did last, meaning that there was still oil left even after you anointed all these kings and all the Kohen Gadols, but Yoshio decided to hide it. Right. So
Okay.
Meaning it wasn't that it ran out. It was that he put
Okay.
it up. And I guess one day we'll find it, right? When we find the Aron, hopefully there'll still be oil left in that little pot.
Oh, it is in the Aron? Is that what we're saying?
We hit it with the Aron.
With the Aron. Okay.
We don't know exactly where.
We'll find it.
We'll find it. That's the hope. Tanur Abanan. Now says the Braita around 12 lines or 14 lines from the top of your bed, Amud Aleph. Ketzad moshchinet hamalachim. How do you anoint a king? How do you actually put it on their head? Kimin nezer, like a crown. Rashi says, I don't know why Rashi doesn't have it here. Rashi says, I don't know if everyone else has in their Rashi. Rashi says kizeh, but my Gemara does not have what kizeh means. But on my side, it has a circle. So basically, like a crown, you would take some oil and pour it all around, or tap it all around his head. Et hakohanim, how do you give the kohen gadol? Kimin ki. You do it like the Greek letter ki. Maikamin ki. Amar Rav Menashe ben Gada kimin kaf yevani. That's like the kaf in Greek. I don't know what the kaf is in Greek, but Rashi gives you a beautiful picture here of what looks like a chet. Rashi, or it should be an upside down chet, right? Where the broad line is the forehead, and then you put some oil around each side above the ears towards the back. So you do it like not a semicircle exactly, but like a chet. Now, Tani Chada, there's one brayta that says, you know that when you do the process, you actually do two things. First, you pour. Motzaei means to actually pour out, like on your salad. You pour oil on his head. Then you place the oil between his eyes, meaning then you start doing the symbol around him, right? So first you just pour some, and then you put the, as we say, like the crown around the king, or the chaf around the kohen gadol. Tanya Achwiti, but there's another brayta that says the opposite order. Now, first you put it between his eyes, and then you pour it on his head. So this is where you're right. It's a machloket tanaim tanaihi. Ikadamri, some think that Mashicha Adifa, that the more noble thing or the more respectful thing is pouring it. Ikadamri, is not pouring it, is anointing, meaning where you put it with your finger, like where you would anoint something, and you rub it on his head, so to make a sign. Some say that pouring it is more important, and that should come first. So it's just a machloket. What's it based on? My time at the why would someone say that pouring is more important than, I'll call it smearing, right, on Mashicha? Because if you look at the pasuk, it says in Shmini, rosh Aaron, that you pour the shemen hamishcha on the head of Aaron, and then and then you anoint him. So it says clearly you do yitzika first. So that's why it's more important. Mandam Mashicha, for the ones who say that anointing is more important, not pouring, my time, because look, think about the kli sharet. They didn't pour it all. The kli sharet, it only says anointed, so it's only anointed, right? So therefore, you see, anointing is the main thing, and sometimes you do yitzika, you pour as well. What about the pasuk, which says by Aaron that they did it in the other order? You could think everything's important all you want. The Torah says, pour it on his head and then anoint him. No, it doesn't mean that. It means, when is it time to pour it? Because you already anointed him. Meaning, you've already anointed him, so now pour it out and you'll make him holy. But the order is that order. Okay, so that is the machloket about how you anoint the Kohen Gadol. Says the Gemara now, very interesting, brayta. We're the last of the narrow lines, right? As everyone probably knows, I don't know if everyone has minhag to say Shir Hamalot a few hours ago, but if you did, Mizmar Kuf Lamed Gimel, which is one of the short Shir Hamalot, talks about this concept that starts off Shir Hamalot David, Hini Matov Menayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, and then it says, Pasuk Bet, Kishemen HaTov, right? Like the oil, Yored al Zakan, Zakan Aaron, that's pouring down on Aaron's beard. So what's that talking about, right? Says the Braita, Kimin Shtei Tapim Margoliot Yutliot Lo Aaron Bezikno. Aaron had like two pearls of oil on his beard. From the time that Moshe anointed him in the beginning of the desert, his whole life, that oil never went away. It was obviously miraculous. That he always had these two pearls of oil that were, hopefully didn't smell, but they were a reminder that he was anointed by Moshe. And that was the Shemen HaTov on the Zakana Aaron. Now, Amar of Papa, I love Rav Papa, or it says Rav Papa, Tana, we have a brayta that says, Kishu misaper, olot v'yoshvot lo b'ikar zikno, right? That when now Rashi understands misaper very curiously as when he would talk, right? Misaper. So when he talked, your beard moves a lot. And so they were worried the drops would fall off. So the drops moved up the beard so that they were protected. Very bizarre shot. The Tosafot HaRosh, I have a Tosafot HaRosh on the side of my Gemara, or Novice Gemara that is, says that misaper means what it usually means, which is when you got a haircut, right? So the problem is, obviously, if you have oil in your beard and you start cutting your beard, what happens to the oil? So what it means is that when he took a haircut with his beard, the oil would go up to his chin where there's no hair, right? And then he would be able to cut the beard, basically. But basically, he had permanent oil on his face, just a little bit, from the Shemen HaMishcha. Now, Davar said Moshe doeg, right? Moshe was worried about this because he said, Shema chas v'shalom alti b'shaman hamishcha. Maybe that when I was pouring it on him, I did too much, or I put it on my clothing, and maybe I got a little benefit from Sheman HaMishcha. So Yatza Batko Amra, no. It's Gesheman. This is the next pasuk in the Sher Malad. It's Gesheman Atova Yered Asakan Aron. It's Ketal Chermon. The next pasuk is it's like the tal on the Chermon, just like Matal Chermon Imbo Meila. Just like there's no Meila on Tal Chermon, it's public property. Av Sheman HaMishcha Shebeskan Aron Imbo Meila. There's no Meila on this Sheman HaMishcha. But still, Adain Haya Aron doing. Aaron was worried. Aaron said, well, maybe Shema Moshe lo ma'al. Maybe Moshe didn't do Me'ilah, but maybe Avlanima alti. Maybe for me it's Me'ilah. I have benefit. I get the Shemin HaMishcha. I get this oil. I don't know. It gives me a good smell. I don't know. People like it. So Yatzta Batko v'Amralo, and that's Pasuk Aleph in the Mizmar. Hine matov v'manaim shevet achim gam yachad. That ma Moshe lo ma'al, afatah lo ma'al. Don't worry, you and Moshe are in this together. Neither of you is in trouble. So this is a very interesting and cute parsha about Shemin HaMishcha. Now, Tanu Rabbanan continues the Braita, another very interesting Agadata. We are at the fifth of the wide lines, at the end of the line. Ein moshchin et hamlachim ela mayan. When you anoint the kings, you take them down to a spring. And you should do Mashiach of a king next to a spring. Why? Because it's very symbolic. Kadesha timashech malchutam. It symbolizes just like the spring keeps going, and it's like an endless source of water from underground. So too the malchut of the king will keep going. Shenemar. Now, how do we know that? Because remember the story at the beginning of Melachim, right? Everyone knows the story when they were having a whole debate about who's going to take over for David, and they were trying to take Adonio was trying to take over. So they came to David. And they said to him, Natan Navi, David said to them, bring all the people, and bring Shlomo, oto el Gichon, bring him down to the Nachal Gichon, right? And then it continues, Tzadok HaKohen and Natan, they'll make him the king. Why don't you just do it in the courtyard? Like, why do you have to schlep down to the Gichon, which is not that far, but it's down from Ir David. So it must be that there's a benefit and there's a requirement to anoint the king next to flowing water. Okay, now this, says the Gemara, is very interesting. And just to think about this, right? It means either there's the king or he's not the king. What do you need the water for? The point is that it matters, right? It has meaning when you think about what happens at the time you did the melucha. Says Reb Ami, now that you're thinking about what's a good sign, right? The question everyone wants to know is, are they going to live out the year or not? It's a very Rosh Hashanah discussion, right? Am I going to live this year or not live this year? If you want to know, you know what you should do? Nitli shraga basar yomi deben Rosh Hashanah yom kippur bebeta to l'nashav zeka. Get a shraga, a lamp, in Aseret Yomei Tshuva, right? Time that everyone's being judged, and bring it into a house where there's no windows open, there's no wind blowing, so nothing will make the light go out, and you leave the light. This is Rashi's understanding. If the light burns the normal length, then Neda Damasik Shatya, then you're going to live the year. If the light goes out, like you have enough oil for 2 hours, but it blows out after an hour, it means that there's other spirits in that room and other things that are there to fight your soul. And so it's a symbol that you're going to die. So don't try this at home. We're going to say in a second. But that's Rashi's pshat. There's another pshat. That's what Rashi brings up pshat, that Mashich Nehura means what it usually means, which is that if the flame is straight, meaning if it goes straight up, not to one side or the other, because there's no wind, so it should go straight up. But as we all know, there's a lot going on in the world. Now, continued Rabbi Ami, if you want to do business, you want to know if your business is going to work, you want to know if it's going to work or not, you know what you should do? You should have a surrogate as a chicken. Lirbi Tarnagola. Take a chicken and call it this is my business venture, this chicken. And Ishamin v'shafir mitzlach. If the chicken grows fat and beautiful, your business is going to work out. So that's how I always invest in the stock market, right? I go with a chicken. And hi boy the boy lemepak the orcha by the meda I hadar vati lebeta. A guy's got to go, or a person's got to go on a big trip. He's going to, I don't know, Alaska, and he wants to know if he's going to make it back home safely. So what he should do is nekam bebeta de chavra or havra. Some have a hay instead of a chet. You should go into a dark house, right, and bring a candle, presumably, and ichazi bevua de bavua if you see the shadow of your shadow, sometimes you see a shadow, but sometimes your shadow causes a second shadow, then leida the hadravati the beta, then you know that you're going to get back home. That's like the second order. Says the Gemara though, lav milti. This is really not a good idea, and this probably goes for all of this, right? Don't do these things. Rashi says because they're not true, right? It doesn't really tell you anything. And furthermore, they can be counterproductive, right? Because you do this thing, you don't see your shadow, and all of a sudden you act like a dead man, and your mazel goes back, and you die. So it's a self-fulfilling negative prophecy. Don't do this at home. But, says Abaya, on that note, Hashada Amrit Simana Miltahi, but now that we said that the king should be anointed by the water, which means that it really matters, right? You could be a king or not a king, but if you do it by the water, it's a good thing. Well, then maybe in life we should sometimes have simanim. La'olam, says Abaya, some add the word, right? La'olam, you should be yehiragol michsi. Now, we have the Girsa Michsi, which doesn't make a ton of sense, but I'm going to read it. You should show off Berei Shata, right? Obviously, others have Lamichli to eat on the beginning of the year. Kara, Verubia, Karti, Visilka, Vitamri. You should eat all these things. I don't always know what they are, but everyone knows this. Squash. I don't know what rubia is. Does someone translate rubia? Karti,
Ruby are like often carrots.
carrots. Okay, we'll
Could
take
be
that.
because they say ruby is ruba.
Rashi
Is
says tilted.
marin.
Rashi says tilted, which means
But
something.
I think in Yiddish it's marin.
Okay,
Here it says fenugreek.
fenugreek. I don't know what fenugreek is exactly, but Rashi says tilted. Fenugreek like a leaf? What is fenugreek?
Fenugreek is like, I think it's a leaf from what fennel comes from. So that's anise.
Oh, okay. Karti are leeks. Silka is
Beets.
beets.
The beets.
Thank you
Yeah.
all. And
Beets.
tamri are dates. So as you probably know, and if you got it from Lindenbaum this year, they sent out in the mail something with all the. I don't know. Do you got it, Miriam? I don't know. Okay, there we go. So they sent out beautiful something with all the different brachot you say, right? The Mishaber, that's based on the Gaonim actually. Hayyun, I think, is the source for a lot of it. Rashi here says something fascinatingly different. Rashi says the reason we eat these things or show these things off is because they all grow very quickly, right? So it's not because of the statement, our year should be karet yichvertu sonehem shel Yisrael, or whatever we say. It's because these are all symbols of things that grow quickly, and that's similar to a fish, right? Which of course grows very quickly. And so that the symbol actually is that you should be marben, yifred, you should be very numerous like these things. Of course, our tradition, if you follow, at least I'm sure it's all Jews, is that we say things on these things. But anyways, that is the connection to Rosh Hashanah. Continues the Gemara now. We are
The ego. Is he referring? Well, what's
means fast. Agal, bagala, right? Means fast.
agala?
Yeah, like you say in Kaddish. Bagala is mankariv, right? It's quickly.
Rapid.
Right.
Come quickly, right?
Amar Rav Misharshi Lebrei. Now, Rav Misharshi has said to his son, it's not so clear what this means. We'll see in a second. It has to do with the simanim. When you're going to learn with your teachers, you're getting ready for showing up in shir. You should learn the Mishnah first, so you know the Mishnah really well, the Braitot and the text, right? And so that when you sit in front of your teacher, you could watch his lips. Not so clear if this means so you know it by heart, so you don't have to look inside. They didn't really have inside, but watch his lips, because it says, your eyes should see your teacher. And when you learn, garsito usually means to review, like when you review your material, garsu al naharad demaya, sit next to water, right? You should sit next to a stream, just like the king. Just like the water's flowing, your Torah should flow. The tiva kilkula de mata machasya, another principle he told his son, was you should rather sit on the kilkule, the ruins of a building in mata machasya, velotivo apadane de Pumpadita, not in a palace in Pumpadita. Rashi says that the people, Pumpadita was this really stuck up city where people were. Pumpadita was a big city, of course, right? There was a big yeshiva in Pumpadita, but that the people in Pumpadita were very snobby, and they had very bad midot. And so it's better to hang out in the worst place in the no air conditioning in Mata Mechasya than to sit in the most beautiful place in Pumbedita. And Tav Gildana Tsaria de Mata Mechasya, it's better to have a rotten fish, old herring in Mata Mechasya than Mecha Mikutcha de Rami Kipi than to have the best kutach, the best caviar in Rami Kipi. Rashi has a couple interpretations for Rami Kipi, but one that's beautiful is that the people who live in the hills, meaning that this is eaten by the fancy schmancy people, it's better to have the simple food than to deal with those people. Now,
Well, what do you see? The Rashi, it says Rashi is here. I'm seeing it just says that it's better to be in the garbage can of Mata Machashim than the palace of from where does he say that the people are haughty?
earlier, if you look at
He says Mutav lo lidor ba'ashba
no,
b'Mata Machashim, the garbage dumps of
Rashi says, I'll read
midor
Rashi.
ba'afanda.
I'll read Rashi quickly. Rashi says that in Mata Mechasya, they had Talmidei Chachamim, Ruyin Lahorot, Tarbut Yafeh Hayabehem. They had good and a culture. Alva Pumpadita, Lohabi Tarbut Ma'alya Kokach. They weren't such good people.
Oh, I see what you okay.
Okay, it continues the Gemara, Rama Karni Belohai. This is in the Tefillah of Chana, right? That we're about to read it, I guess, also on Rosh Hashanah, right? She says, my Karen, my Karen is like, like the shofar, basically. My horn is praising God. Rama Karni, she said the word Karen, velo Rama Pachi, and not my pach is a pach shemen, right? Not my container. Because David and Shlomo nimshchu b'Karen, David and Shlomo who were anointed with a Karen, they were nimshchu malchutam. Their malchut continued. Shaul and Yehu, nimshchu b'pach, lo nimshchu malchutam. Where it talks about a pach for malchut, it doesn't last. So that's why Chana said Rama Karni. Back to our Gemara. We are back now a little bit to our Mishnah for a little bit. The Mishnah said, Hamashu, we are 7 lines from the bottom, the 2 dots. Hamashuach b'sheman HaMishcha, right? So remember, our Mishnah said that who is the Kohen HaMashiach? It's one who is Sheman HaMishcha. Tanu Rabbanan says the Braita. How do we know this? HaMashiach. It says the anointed one, Yachol Melech. You might think that pasuk is referring to the king, because the king also gets anointed. Talmud Omer Kohen. So therefore, the Torah says, it's referring to the Kohen who's Mashiach. Kohen, you might think, you just need to be a Kohen Gadol. Yachol Merubah Begadim. Remember, the Kohanim who were no longer anointed, they just became the Kohanim Gedolim by wearing the Shmona Begadim of the Kohen Gadol. So Talmud Omer Mashiach. Mashiach. Now, if it just said the word Mashiach, I would think any Kohen who has anointed, including Yachol Mashuach Milchama. Remember, there was a special Kohen who got anointed to lead the people out to war. So you might think that person's included also. Talmud Omer Ha Kohen HaMashiach, meaning She'eno Mashiach al Gabav. There's no one who's anointed who's higher than him. And the Kohen Mashiach Milchama is not the top Kohen. He's below the Kohen Gadol. My mashma, how do you see that from the pasuk? Kedamar Rava, as Rava Darshan Ha Yarech. It says by the Yaakov, right? Don't eat the Gida Nasha of the Yarech. It means hamiyumenet shebiyarech, the strongest part of the yarech. Hachanami hamashiach means hamiyuman shebemeshichim. It means the most haughty, the most highest, the most exalted of all those who are anointed. In this case, meaning the Kohen Gadol. Now that's the Braita. Amar Man. So let's analyze the Braita. It says Mashiach. You would have thought that means the king. It says, what do you mean? How can it mean that the king brings? Remember, this is talking about the carbon of the Par Kohen Mashiach, right? So we're saying if it didn't say the word Kohen and it said Par Mashiach, you would think it means the king. But the king has his own carbon. Remember, the king is the Sa'ir of the Nasi. So what do you mean? Yachol Melech? How can the Melech, Paru Demaiti, how can the Melech bring a Par? Sa'iru Demaiti. We already know that the king, the Nasi, brings a Sa'ir. It's just no. I would have thought that the Nasi or the king brings both carbonot depending on the circumstance. If you forget the action, then yavi sa'ir. Al helem davar. Remember, this whole halacha is helem davar, meaning not that you forget what you're doing wrong. You paskin incorrectly. So you might think if you paskin incorrectly, you're being a par, so that they're both talking about a king. Kamashvan, that they're not. One is talking about a king, the sa'ir nasi, and one is talking about the kohen gadol. Now the Mishnah continued and said, "Ein bein mashuach b'shemen hamishcha lemeruba begadim," except for the parabal kol mitzvot. The only difference between a Kohen Gadol who got anointed and a Kohen Gadol who only became the Kohen Gadol because he put on all the begadim, the only difference is the par. Matnitin to look Rabbi Meir. Now that's not like the Tana Rabbi Meir. The Rabbi Meir Tanya, Rabbi Meir said explicitly in a Braita, Meruba begadim, that a Kohen Gadol, who's Kohen Gadol not with Meshicha, but with just wearing the clothing, Mevi Parabal Kol Mitzvot. He brings the Paral Davar, not Paral Davar Tzibur, he brings the Par Kohen Mashiach. Divi Rabbi Meir, the Lo Hoduch Lo Chachamim. And the Chachamim did not agree with him. Now, my time with Rabbi Meir, 2 lines in the bottom. What's the reason for Rabbi Meir? The Tanya, because the pasuk says Kohen Mashiach, so it says Rabbi Meir, Ein li elam Mashiach b'shem mishcha. So that implies you have to get anointed. How do I know Merubah begadim minayin? Talmud ha Kohen Mashiach. It adds ha Kohen, the Kohen, meaning not just the Mashiach, but any Kohen Gadol. So that is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Now, clearly, our Mishnah disagrees with Rabbi Meir. Says in Rabbi Mayokimta. So how do you explain our Mishnah? Kirabanan. Turn the page. Well, then Ema Seifa. We're now on Daf Yud Bet Amabet at the top. Look at the second part of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah continued and said, Ein bein Kohen mishamesh the Kohen sha'avar. There's no difference in a Kohen who's actually functioning to a Kohen who functioned in the past. Remember, the case is, right, you always need a Kohen Gadol. Let's say the Kohen Gadol gets into a car accident, right, or he becomes Tameh, right, so he's no longer able to serve in the Beit HaMikdash. So they would anoint another Kohen Gadol as a stand-in, and then when the first Kohen Gadol got healthy again, he would come back, and he is now called Kohen Mishamesh. He's now the functioning Kohen Gadol. And the one who was Kohen Gadol for a day is called the Kohen Gadol She'avar. Says the Braita, this is our Mishnah, Ein ben Kohen Mishamesh the Kohen She'avar, Elapar Yom HaKippurim B'Siri Ta'efa. The only difference is that the Kohen She'avar is still a Kohen Gadol. He just can't bring 2 korbanot, the power of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, and the Asir Ta'efa that's brought every day. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. I'll tell Rabbi Meir, Tanya, because there's a Braita that we didn't know about before, but says the Braita in the 3rd line, a rabo psul b'kohen gadol. Let's say the Kohen Gadol gets puzzle temporarily, right? Va'avar, and he's put aside for a day or a week. Uminu Kohen acher tachtav, and now you have a new Kohen Gadol, and then the first Kohen gets better. Harishon chazer lavodato, the first Kohen goes back to his work. Vasheni kol mitzvah kuna alav, and the second one has all the rules of Kohen Gadol, different Rabbi Meir, which is what our Mishnah sounded, except for a couple exceptions. But in general, he's a Kohen Gadol. Continues the Braita though, Rabbi Yossi Omer, and this is the Chachamim's opinion, Rishon chazer lavodato, the first one gets his job back, but Sheni eno ra'oi lo Kohen Gadol, lo Kohen Hadyot. The second one can't do anything because he's not ra'oi to be a Kohen. You can't have 2 Kohanim Gedolim, and he can't be a Kohen Hadyot. Why? Says the Gemara. Amar of Yossi, let's explain, says the Braita. Maaseh Yosef ben Ilam mitzipori. There was a guy, a Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol, a Kohen named Yosef ben Elam, who came from Tzipori, who was a Kohen, and Irabo Psul Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol had a Psul, and Avar, they put him aside, Uminu, not Acher, so the Bachir changed the Girsa for obvious reasons, Uminu Hu Tachtav. They made this guy, Yosef, this person, Yosef ben Elam, the Kohen Gadol, instead of the original one, right? And then I have a Haggah that adds all this language. And then the first one got better, and they came in front of the Chachamim, the Kohanim Gadol did not allow Yosef ben Elam, the temporary replacement, to function as either a Kohen Gadol, like Rabbi Meir says, but also not a Kohen Hadyot. Why? Kohen Gadol mishum Eva. You can't have 2 Kohanim Gedolim. They're going to have a lot of hatred and jealousy and fights. But Kohen Hadyot, why can't he be a Kohen Hadyot? Mishum malim mikodashim maridim. Because once you go up in Kedusha, you can't go down. So basically, he's stuck. He goes out to pasture, right? So that's the opinion of the Chachamim, or Rav Yossi, not our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that he's still a Kohen Gadol, just except for very small things. So then you're saying, Reisha Rabbanan, Sefer Rabbi Meir. Says Rav Chisda, what's the big deal? Sure. Why does a Mishnah have to be completely consistent? Reisha Rabbanan, Sefer Rabbi Meir. Rav Yosef says, I have another answer. Rebbe, the author of our Mishnah is not a Tana, it's Rebbe. Rebbe is bringing together different opinions of Tanaim. V'nasav la'aliba ditznai. He's quoting our Mishnah with various opinions. Rashi usually understands this means Rebbe himself holds like Rebbe Meir in one case and like the Chachamim in the other case. Rabbeinu Tosed HaRush here quotes another beautiful opinion that maybe Rebbe doesn't hold of it, but Rebbe, remember the series of Mishnayot that we have now, right, are Ein Bain, like in Sechet Megillah, right? There's no difference in this or that. So he wants to give an example where there's an opinion that there's no difference. So that's why you have to quote Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan in a Mishnah. Rava says, I have another answer for you, because there's a third Tana who says both of those opinions. Rabbi Shimon he. In fact, there's another Tana, Rabbi Shimon, who savarla Rabbi Meir bechada, who actually agrees with Rabbi Meir's opinion that a Kohen she'avar is still a Kohen Gadol, except for very limited things. But he also, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion that's not Rabbi Meir's opinion. That's the Chachamim's opinion. So he holds like Rabbi Meir in the first part of the Mishnah. But he disagrees with him about his second opinion about a Kohen she'avar, and he holds. Sorry, the first part of the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir, right? Rabbi Meir says that a Kohen who is merubah bigadim would bring a par of a Kohen Mashiach, because it's not par Kohen Mashiach, it's par Kohen Gadol. So Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Meir about that point, but he agrees with Rabbi Meir that a Kohen she'avar is still a Kohen Gadol. How do we know that? Tanya, in fact, we have a Braita that goes through all of these things, and we're going to do 5 minutes of this Braita, okay?
Well, what is the Reisha and what's the Seifa again?
The Reisha is the first part of the Mishnah says that a Kohen that is a Kohen Gadol because he is merubah bigadim but did not get Sheman HaMishcha, our Mishnah says he does not bring a par of a Kohen Gadol. That is against Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that a Kohen Gadol who's merubah bigadim also brings a par for Helam Davar, right, for forgetting something. That's the first part. The second part of the Mishnah said that a Kohen she'avar, right, a Kohen who was a temporary Kohen Gadol and then got pushed aside, he remains in the status of a Kohen Gadol. That is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Yossi said that he has no status. He's not a Kohen Gadol and not a Kohen Hadyot. So in one, we're going the Reisha not like Rabbi Meir, and in the Seifa like Rabbi Meir. But that is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, as the following Braita explains. Says the Braita, where am I? It's around 8 from the last of the narrow lines. Titania. Dvarim says, this is a very general Braita. We're going to have to go through a lot of it, and we're not going to finish it today, I don't think. Says the Braita. Dvarim shebein Kohen Gadol Kohen Hadyot Elohim. Let's go through all the differences. The difference in a Kohen Gadol and a regular Kohen. What's the differences? Par habal kol mitzvot. Right, a Kohen Gadol brings a special par when he goes against the mitzvah. A regular Kohen is like a regular Yisrael, and he brings a regular carbon chatat. That's one. Par Kohen Yom Kippurim. The Kohen Gadol brings a special par. Remember, we're going to read it in a few days, or in a couple of weeks, about Yom Kippur. And, Asir Teifa. Every day a Kohen Gadol brings Asir Teifa. Nobody else brings that carbon. Furthermore, a Kohen Gadol lo poreya. He doesn't grow his hair long for a mourning. Velo poreim, and he doesn't tear his shirt, his clothing when he mourns. What the pasuk says, Gadav lo yifra, Rosho lo yifra, Gadav lo yifrum. Aval, now, but there is a point that the Kohen Gadol doesn't not tear at all. Hu poreim milamata. He can tear his clothing from the bottom. We're going to discuss this tomorrow. V'hadyot milamala. A regular person tears his clothing from the top, which is much more noticeable. Furthermore, a Kohen Gadol ein metameh lekrovim. Torah says that clearly. He doesn't become tameh to his relatives, unlike a regular Kohen. Umuzhar la betula. He has to marry only a betula. It's a mitzvah taseh. V'asur b'almana. He's not allowed to marry an almana or anyone else who's prohibited. Umachzir et harotzeach. And when he dies, the people in the Ir Miklat go free. And furthermore, makriv onein, a Kohen Gadol can bring a karban even if he's an onein. An onein is someone whose relative died, and it's the day of the burial. So usually by a regular person, you don't do mitzvot. You're not allowed to bring a karban that day. The Kohen Gadol, remember we learned from Aaron when his sons died, he brings the karban that day. Ve'eno ochel, but you're not allowed to eat it. Ve'eno cholik, you don't get a portion of it. And furthermore, the Kohen Gadol is makriv chelek barosh. He gets to bring first portion in the Beit HaMikdash. He gets first rights. V'notel chelek barosh, and he gets the first portion. U'mishamesh b'shmoneh kelim, and he wears 8 begadim, unlike a Kohen Hadyot. And kol avodat Yom Kippurim eino ksher elabo. All of the things of Yom Kippur are only kosher with him. And patur al tumat mikdash u'kedoshav. Now this we had last week, right? The Kohen Gadol, it does not bring a karban. Remember, every other person who does tumat mikdash u'kedoshav brings an karban olev yored, as we learned all about in Masechet Shavuot. But we had an opinion, and we're going to see in a minute, if you remember the Mishnah from Daf Tet, it was the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, right, that a Kohen Gadol is patur on tumat mikdash u'kedoshav. That's how we know this is Rabbi Shimon. But I'm giving away the secrets here. Continues the Braita, the kulam nohagim b'merubah bigadim. All of these rules apply to a Kohen Gadol, whether he's a Kohen Gadol who got anointed, or he's a Kohen Gadol who became Kohen Gadol by merubah bigadim, which is exactly what we said in the Mishnah. Chutz mipar mevi'al kol mitzvot, except for the par kol mitzvot. So that, of course, goes against Rabbi Meir, who says that the par is brought even by Kohen Gadol's merubah bigadim. This Braita says he doesn't. And let's finish the Braita. Kulan noagim b'mashuach she'avar. All of these apply to someone who is a Kohen Gadol, who was passed over, meaning he was temporary and he got pushed aside. Chutz mipar Yom Kippur Masirat Eifa, except for these two, which is exactly what our Mishnah said. V'kulan ein nohagim b'mishuach milchama. Now, none of these rules apply to a mishuach milchama. Remember, this is the next level Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol, but a Kohen who's anointed to lead the Jews out to war, like Pinchas was, right? And except chutz michamisha dvarim harim b'parsha, except for the 5 things that are said in the parsha that even a Kohen mishuach milchama can't do. And that is lo parei v'lo pareim. That's 2. He doesn't grow his hair. He doesn't tear his clothing when someone dies. Ein metamei lekrovim. He can't become tamei. Musar al betula and asur ba'almana. Those 5. And the next halacha, continues the Braita, of machzirat harotzeach, that applies also to Kohen Meshuach Milchama Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That if a Kohen Meshuach Milchama dies, then the people go free from the Ir Miklat, and the Chachamim omrim eino machzir. The Chachamim say that the Kohen Meshuach Milchama is not strong enough or not relevant enough to bring people back from the Ir Miklat. So anyways, that's a side point. We're going to actually talk about it more tomorrow. But ask the Gemara, how do you know this is Rabbi Shimon? How do you know this Braita is Rabbi Shimon? That is because Amar of Papa, because Man Shamali Damar Patral Tumat Mikdash Kudoshav, who is the Tana in our Mishnah on Daf Ted who said that a Kohen Gadol does not bring the Karban Olevi or Eid for Tumat Mikdash Kudoshav? That was Rabbi Shimon. So this Braita is Rabbi Shimon, and this Braita says both opinions of our Mishnah. First of all, that a par for a chet is brought only by Kohen who had Shemen HaMishcha, not by Kohen Gadol's Merubah Begadim. And furthermore, that a Kohen She'avar has all the halachot of a Kohen Gadol except for Asirat Eifa and Par of Yom Kippurim. So that is how we know that. Now we're up to the 2 dots. How does everyone feel about going to the Mishnah? Yes? Okay, we're going to go. Chutz michamisha dvarim omrim b'parsha, right? Is that what we're up to? Yeah. Except for the 5 things we say in the parsha, minani mili. How do you know that this applies to all these kohanim? Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita. The pasuk says hakohen hagadol me'achav. Who's that referring to? Is the Kohen Gadol? Okay, the Kohen who's greater than his brothers means the Kohen Gadol. Asher yitzak al rosho shemen hamishcha. Now that can't be referring to the Kohen Gadol. We already know the Kohen Gadol. So what does it mean when it says you poured the oil on his head? Zeh mashuach milchama. That's the Kohen who got anointed to lead them to war. Umilei et yadolo boshet begadim. Then it says he's wearing all the clothing. Zeh merubah begadim. So we now know all the Kohanim, the Kohen Meshuach Milchama, the Kohen Merubah Begadim, the Kohen Gadol, who's regular Kohen who had Meshicha. Al Kulan Hu Omer, about all of them, the Torah says, Roshol Lo Yifra, Begadav Lo Yifram, Kol Nefshot Meit Lo Yavo. Aye, so what about the next halacha? Yachal Yeh Kulam Makrivim Oninim. You might think that they all can bring a karban when they're in onin, when they're in a day of mourning, or the day they buried their relative, that they can all bring a karban because they all have the status. Talmud Omer, therefore it says, Ki Nezer Shemen Mishchat Elohav Alav. The special crown of the oil is on him. Alav Eloh Chavero. It excludes other people, meaning only the Kohen Gadol, not the Meshuach Milchama. V'achar shechalku hakatov yochel yeh mitzuv ala betula. Talmud Omer v'hu. That's an extra pasuk of Vihu to tell you that not only that the Kohen Meshuach Milchama also has to marry a Betula. And Kitznai, in fact, that is machloket in a Braita. The Braita says, Vihu Isha Betula Yikach. It's a pasuk. Pasuk says he, meaning the Kohen Gadol, has to marry an Isha who's a Betula. Now, says Rabbi Yishmael, Achar shechilek hakatuv riba. Rabbi Yishmael. Says Rabbi Yishmael, after the Torah says to you that you are different, meaning that there's different Kohanim and there's a Kohen Meshuach Milchama, we add back that person also, this halacha applies to them as well. That's Rabbi Yishmael's opinion, okay? That he has to marry the Betula. Rabbi Akiva says, and that's the opinion we're saying now, Ein li ela shavar machmat kiryo. Machmat mumin minayin. We're going to see what this means in a second. You only know that it's referring to a Kohen who was remember, there's a Kohen Gadol. He goes off from being Kohen Gadol, and you appoint someone new in front of him, right? You only know that the new appointee, who then becomes a Kohen She'avar, because they bring the first guy back, that's only if he's Avar Machmat Kiryo. Maybe he became Tameh, right? So at the time he became Tameh, he knows he's Tameh for a day. Someone else is going to fill in. He's going to come back to the job. But what if it's Machmat Mumin Minayin? What if it's because he didn't become Kohen Gadol because he got a wound? How do you know that the halacha of Isha b'Betula still applies to him? Talmud Omar Vihu. That tells you also, right? It tells you that person also has to still marry a Betula. But what's missing from Rabbi Akiva now is any pasuk to tell you that a Meshuach Milchama is Married Betula. And that's the halacha we just quoted, that halacha doesn't apply to a Meshuach Milchama. Now, Ba'minei Ravamir of Nachman, asked Rava to Rav Nachman, we are 4 lines from the Mishnah, if that's helpful, 3 lines from the Mishnah. What about a Kohen Mashiach Shemitztara? A Kohen gets tzarat, which is obviously a terrible thing, right? The Kohen Gadol, he's Kohen Mashuach, he has Shemen HaMishcha, he gets tzarat, and obviously he no longer is the Kohen Gadol until he gets better. So for a month or whatever, he's out of commission. But then he comes back, right? Mahu ba'almana. Is he allowed during that time? This is probably not during that time, meaning after when he comes back, is he allowed to marry? During that time, is he allowed to marry an almana? Okay. Do you say that mitchadachi, right? That during the time that he is sort of put aside, right? He is just pushed aside, and therefore he is not allowed to marry, right? But because he really, or miftar pater, or do you say the other status? This is one explanation, that he's basically completely not Kohen Gadol at that time. So la biyadi. Now, Rav Nachman didn't know the answer, but zimnin aviyativ Rav Papa v'kami boile. Now, there was a time that Rav Papa was sitting and they raised the same question. They said, we don't know the answer to this question. And Amr le Huna, breder of Nachman, Rav Papa, Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, must have been a younger person. He's not called Rav Huna, right? Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, said to Rav Papa, Tanina, what do you mean? You know it from the Braita we just quoted. Because the Braita we just quoted said, Ein li elash avar machmat kiryo. I only know that he's a Kohen still if he became moved basically because he was Tameh. But if he's avar machmat mumin minayin, how do I know that if a Kohen Gadol got pushed aside because he had a wound, that he remains in the status of Kohen Gadol, Tamul Lomar v'hu? And, as Rashi explains, having tzarat is essentially having a big mum. It's having a big illness. And so basically you see from this Braita that even at the time that the Kohen Gadol has tzarat, he remains a Kohen Gadol and therefore can't marry he has to only marry Betula, he can't marry an almana. So that was a beautiful answer. Said Rav Nachman, said Rav Papa, come, he got up, Nashke Bereshe, he kissed him on his head, V'yav le'barte, and he got him married to his daughter, as you would expect. So that was the reward for finding the right answer. So that's how Huna by Rav Nachman came to be married to the daughter of Rav Papa. So beautiful marriage story at the end of the day. We're up to this Mishnah. We are going to continue tomorrow at the Mishnah on Daf Yod Bet Amud Bet at 7:45 a.m. But we're not going to finish the whole Daf tomorrow because we have to leave something for Monday. So I'll figure out where we'll get to. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Thank you. Shavua Tov.